When a pastor arrives in a church, in any church setting, you're going to lead as a pastor, but particularly in a church revitalization situation, part of the challenge is to figure out who's leading and who has the authority, who is the influencer. And sometimes it would be a person who has a position, and sometimes it's not. So how would a pastor find out, okay, I've arrived, now who really is the influencer in this church?
Well, first needs to be said that in these next several weeks, these 5 areas are so crucial. We start with authority because what question you just asked is the most important thing for every new pastor to evaluate when he goes into a church revitalization. And it first needs to be said what it is not. It is not the person who's got the salary and the name on the sign. So the pastor who thinks he all of a sudden just got hired, his name got put on that sign outdoors, he's in charge. And that's just not how it works. The way you find out who's in charge is who are the influencers? Who are the people that everybody looks to when a decision's made? Or who does everybody listen to? And the reason you want to say that is because if you look at who obviously you think will be in charge, you will miss who actually is. You've got to look for the people who have influence, but do so maybe in a very subtle, passive way. It might be the 85-year-old widow who sits in the back and never talks, but gives more money than anybody else, and everybody knows it. So they all check with her about how they feel about this decision. So you have to think outside the box and think creatively and intuitively about trying to figure out who that was. In our situation, it was the elderly secretary that I inherited because she had been, every pastor came in every 2 to 3 years. Well, she had been there 10 plus. She was the only one who knew all the records, all the finances, and everybody trusted her. She was in charge more than anybody else. And I would have never guessed that. Who was in charge in your church when you got there?
It's a complex situation because of the size, not just of the church, but of the leadership and the complexities of it. There were different people who wielded influence in different ways. And that made it in some ways more challenging to try to discern. And there were almost pockets of people who looked to different individuals to be a primary influence. And people are generally unaware of the way they're influenced by other people. And so I think this is the hard part. You ask a search committee or you get hired at a church, you meet with a committee and you try to ask them questions to diagnose what's happening. And sometimes people are unaware of the way they're influenced by other people. And so they may tell you, the scripture is the authority, or we're ready to follow a pastor. We really want a pastor who will lead us. And I think they genuinely mean that. But at times they're just not aware of the fact that they have a long-standing relationship with this, older gentleman. And so they have a tendency to follow what he says. And they're well-meaning in it, but.
So I've got a really provocative question that I ask churches when they ask me to come in, come help us, figure out what's going on, what's wrong, or help us find the next pastor. And I've got a series of questions that a lot of them are based on these 5 areas we're going to be talking about. But around this one, to sit with a group, these are all the, a lot of them influential, and this committee's been formed or whatever, and they're bringing me in. One of the first questions I'll ask. So I want everybody to share who's in charge in this church. And just to see what people say can be so insightful. In fact, if you're going to interview with a church one day and you're getting a chance to this pastoral committee, that's a great question to ask. You won't get the right answer, by the way, probably, but just to see how they respond. Some of them may, Sally's actually in charge. We're really honest, Oh, it's the congregation. We're congregationals in charge, right?
Yep.
You're just going to learn a lot from asking that question.
That's right.
Because that really is the core question. That is the number one question. If you see how a church views authority and who's in charge, you're really going to figure out whether they see that God's ultimately in charge of their church, which is true everywhere.
Well, that's right.
Even though that shows up in different ways.
Yeah, one of the questions I was shepherded to ask, mentors, you try to help you when you're going to interview, but ask questions like, what was the last time that the church made a controversial decision, and then how did you arrive at that decision, and what did that process look like? And to listen to different committee members try to describe that decision and try to hear them agree on that, and then their perspective on it really does uncover the fact often that there's a lot of dysfunction when it comes to who's in charge or where the authority is.
And in this context, when you're talking about a group like that in a church, when you're trying to assess things, whether you're helping a church, whether you're going in to interview with a church, asking everybody to share is really interesting, because a lot of times there's a spokesperson in those groups.
That's right.
And in an ironic way, you see actually who's in charge by the spokesperson.
That's right.
Call on the lady on the side that some reason is
Yep.
on this team,
Yep.
but has not said a word yet.
That's right.
Again, these are all little ways, tricks, for lack of a better way
Yep.
to put it, to assess who's really in charge in this church, because that's what you have to figure out. It's one of the first things you need to figure out as a new pastor going into a revitalization, because then you're going to know who are going to be the people who resist you,
Yep.
who are the people you want to go win. I mean,
That's right.
they're going to be the influencers
Yep.
you want. That's who you need to start going through to try to figure out where to move next.
Oh yeah, leading and shepherding well will require you to know that.
Yeah.